Hello, and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me is a man who was nearly perfect, Rich. Hello, Rich.
Thank you. Wow, nearly perfect though.
Yes.
Yeah, a 12-1 in his career in life. I would say.
Yeah, that's a good record. I'm like 8-5. So,
well, you know,
yeah.
hey.
What can you do? I was the champion back in the early days when you'd have to win as many games to be a champion. So
Right, exactly, and you could hand check. So to be honest, your era is better than my era because you could hand check.
It was a lot tougher. Yes, we could hand check it. We were much tougher. We were much more physical. We had more skills as well. Somehow. Yeah, so
you didn't make these super teams either. You didn't get real lazy and say, you know what, really good players should come together and play on the same team. It wasn't like that in your day. No.
We never had good players play
Every
together.
superstar was on their own team and battled each other.
They actually forced superstars to join other teams because they didn't want them all to be on one team. Yeah,
right, which is a great thing. I'm glad
that's
they did
the way they did it.
But,
yeah, no, I do remember that
until until 2011 when LeBron went to Miami. Until then, that's how it was done.
Then the tide was cast, and everything's gone downhill from there. Once you let one guy join up with his friends on a super team, it just the floodgates
balloons from there.
They come loose. Is that what floodgates do? They come loose. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know. Do they come? I think they just go up and down, though, right? Do they technically come loose, or do they just open?
Are they broken? Are they? I'm
not sure. I don't think I've ever actually seen a floodgate.
I don't know a whole lot about floodgates, to be honest. So yeah, this is not a floodgate education podcast. As much as we would like to do that, it's not the best. Not our area of expertise. Basketball history allegedly is our area of expertise. So
that is true. We do very good at that. Let's do it. I think it's a good idea.
So you dug into an interesting bit of trivia I found about teams that very nearly were perfect in the playoffs. That has not happened yet in NBA history. We're at a point where it could happen very soon, but it has yet to happen, and you explored some teams that came extremely close.
Yeah, so just to give people an idea of the premise of the show, we wanted to do this last week before the NBA Finals. I got very sick, and I was like, oh, man, I was so disappointed, too, because we had done, a lot of the work on this of like, oh, perfect playoff runs for the Warriors, all this would be great, because, they're going into the Finals as one of few teams to be perfect before the finals start, and I was worried, the finals are going to start, maybe they'll lose one. Oh, it didn't matter because they're 2-0 so far in the finals. We could be looking at the first ever perfect postseason ever, but they're not completely unprecedented as far as teams that have gone and made deep playoff runs while still being perfect here. And, of course, so the Warriors, they're perfect 14-0 as of the recording of this podcast. They were the first team ever to win their first 12 games. We'll talk about that a little bit, though. Obviously, the changing of the playoff structure helps them be the first to do that when there was, other potential chances here and there. What's also real fun about that, too, is they're winning by an average of 17 points per game, and they're 22 and 19-point victors in the NBA Finals. So they're just dominating. They're just amazing. But there's only two previous teams in the modern era who went 11-0 before the league moved to a best of 7 in the first round. That was the 89 Lakers and the 2001 Lakers, so we'll talk a little about them later. But we wanted to touch on a little bit of the other teams because there are quite a few others that enter the NBA Finals with a perfect playoff record. We want to look at a little bit of how long they kept the streak alive through the Finals and see if maybe the Warriors are the team that could pull off the perfect postseason. They're 2 games away from doing it, and as we'll talk about in a little bit, they've gotten longer than or farther rather than just about any other team in history. But there is precedent, though, and they're not alone.
No, they're not alone. In fact, the first team that we're going to discuss back in the days of the old BAA, the 1949 Minneapolis Lakers, they won the championship. They were 7-0 entering the finals. That year, they had the best offense and defense in the league and were first in SRS. Their key players on that team were George Mikan. Every listener to this, I'm sure, has heard of, and he was 28.3 points per game in the regular season, 30.3 points per game in the playoffs. Supported also by Jim Pollard, who was a great player in his day as well. Some of the guys, Vern Mickelson, would come along later that were a big part of that dynasty. Slater Martin, same, but those were the two key guys right there. They managed to they swept the first 2 rounds, which were best of 3. They beat the Chicago Stags 2-0, and they also beat the Rochester Royals 2-0. Rochester now the Sacramento Kings. And they beat the Washington Capitals in the finals 4-2. They won the first 3 games of the finals, so they were a game away from being perfect.
So close, close.
Yes. But Washington was able to win 2 to push it to a 6th game, kind of like the Sonics in 1996 against the Bulls. Yes. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, so the Lakers had come over the year before from the NBL. They had won that league's championship. The NBL and the BAA were the two teams that merged to become the NBA. The NBA is a little shady about their history, doesn't really give the NBL the credit that it's due. But after winning that championship, the Lakers, along with Rochester, Fort Wayne, who were the Pistons, of course, now Detroit, and in Indianapolis, not the Pacers, the Olympians, I believe.
The Olympians,
yes,
I think
moved
that's
over
correct.
to the to the BAA, and then the year after that, those leagues merged. The Hawks and Nationals stayed in the NBL, and then they went over to the NBA in the merger. In fact, 5 of the 8 original NBA teams that basically survived the craziness of the early 50s when teams were contracting and such, have the roots in the NBL. So half of that league actually started in the NBL, not the BAA. But Mikan himself, he had actually started off with the Chicago American Gears, led them to an NBL championship in 47. So it's 3 years in a row that a George Mikan-led team wins a championship in its league. And that continues throughout the early 50s. Then eventually there's some shenanigans happened. The Gears owner decided to form a different league, and which folded after just a month. And then eventually Mikan did not have a team, and he ended up going to the Lakers and changed the course of basketball history.
And 1950, the Minneapolis Lakers would repeat that because they would win a title once again. In this particular run of their playoffs, we'll get to it here in a little bit because it's a little more complicated than it was the prior year, obviously with the new league and some new teams. But let's circle back a little bit about the Minneapolis Lakers first. Regular season record 51-17. That was first in the NBA's new Central Division. SRS, it was 8.25, which was obviously first in the league. And this is the 25th best single season SRS of all time. So definitely an elite team of all time. Key players, of course, George Mikan, 27.4 points per game in the regular season, 31.3 in the playoffs. The aforementioned Jim Pollard, he had 14.7 in the regular season, 12 in the playoffs. And then Vernon Nicholson, as you mentioned, kind of emerging a little bit more here, 11.6 in the regular season. He steps that up to 13.0 in the playoffs. So a little bit more of him emerging, and like you said, a few other guys. But this was definitely one of the early dynasties of professional basketball in a lot of ways. As far as the playoff path, it's really kind of weird. So you're going to have to stick with us here as we explain it here. So they won the NBA Central Division first place tiebreaker versus the Rochester Royals. The teams had identical 31-17 records in the regular season. So, okay, Mikan has 35 points. That leads the Lakers, into the NBA's Central semifinals. Then they go to the NBA Central Division semifinals against the Chicago Stags. Then they go to the NBA Central Division Finals against the Fort Wayne Pistons. They sweep both those series 2-0, 2-0. If you're kind of wondering what the hell's going on here, the league had a really odd playoff structure this year with each division acting almost as its own entity post-merger. To define the first and third place, the Lakers played games against the Royals, the Stags, and the Pistons. And this was quote-unquote preliminary to the 1950 NBA playoffs. So they do all those games. They get through the Stags, they get through the Pistons. Then they go to the NBA semifinals against the Anderson Packers. So hopefully sticking with us here. It was very, very weird. And if you look at it as well, it's confusing. Like some teams didn't play the same teams. Like some teams played less games than the other. It was a mess. I mean, they're still trying to get this league together. And as Jason mentioned, the 50s were chaotic for basketball. And this year was definitely one of them. So once the Lakers made it through the NBA Central Division playoffs, they faced off with the Anderson Packers, as mentioned, of the Western Division. The Syracuse Nationals got a bye to the finals, so they weren't really involved in this. I'm not exactly sure why. I think it's because they had a higher win percentage, but they played less games. So that hardly seems fair that the Lakers got the raw end of that deal. But the Syracuse Nationals got a bye to the finals, going 51-13. The Lakers were 1-1 against them in the regular season, so it's not like they had any issues with the tiebreaker. But they went 51-17 overall. So I think it was win percentage. I couldn't find out. Who the hell knows? Whatever, doesn't matter. Anyway, we get to the NBA Finals. The Minneapolis Lakers then beat the Syracuse Nationals in the NBA Finals. They won the first game before Syracuse finally got a chance to win and put them away. But yeah, so that led really the Lakers were 8-0 if you count all the early Central Division playoffs and stuff. They were 8-0, but they were able to only get one game into the NBA Finals before they ended up losing as well. So not really close to a perfect playoff run, but yeah, not bad. I mean, pretty close. I mean, they win 4-2 in the NBA Finals. Not as close as they were the year prior, but certainly right up there.
That's a good explanation, by the way. That is very complicated. I think you did.
It took me so long to figure because there's really no it's really hard to find info on that. So I had to kind of follow this paper trail, and then I was like, oh, they must have lost a tiebreaker. And then I find they were 1-1 against each other. I was like, all right, I don't know.
Yeah.
It had to be win percentage, but if they don't play the same amount of games, well, whatever. Who knows?
I remember, I can't remember exactly how they did it, but I remember there, of course, being a lot of craziness with that year in the schedule, obviously merging the two leagues. Geographically, it's complicated because most of the NBL teams were in smaller markets in the Midwest, but they'd had the better talent for the most part. The old BAA teams were in bigger cities, and getting everybody in the right division, and it was a 17-team league. It was very unyieldy. So obviously, a lot of those teams started to drop off in the next couple of seasons to the point where they went down to 8. So yeah, it was definitely look great.
Do you know who are the Anderson Packers these days?
The Anderson Packers do not exist, but except in our hearts. But yes,
in our hearts and our minds.
In our hearts. Yeah, I believe it's Anderson, Indiana. So if anyone who's wondering where that city is, the Anderson, Indiana Packers. So now, speaking of convoluted playoff structures, the 1954 Syracuse Nationals. So they did not win the title. They were 6-0 going into the finals, including a round robin. That regular season, they were 42-30, finished second in their division. They had a really good expected win-loss, 15-22, so they were way under what they would have been. They were number one in SRS in the league. Their top players, Dolph Shays and Paul Seymour. Shays had 17.1 points per game in the regular season, 16 in the playoffs. And what happened basically is within each division, the top 3 teams in the season standings played a double round robin. It was one game in each city for each pair of teams, and you eliminated one of the participants. So Syracuse went 4-0 in their round robin with Boston and New York. And then after that,
we had somebody on Twitter. Just sorry not to interrupt, but somebody on Twitter asked, "Would this?" Because I mentioned this round robin as I was trying to kind of figure this out a little bit, and someone said, "Would the NBA Finals this year be more exciting if there was a round robin?" I don't know. I maybe, but does anybody really want a round robin in the NBA playoffs?
I mean, honestly, it would be hard for the playoffs to be less exciting than they've been this year. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the way that it's been. So perhaps a round robin would add a little spice to things. But just as far as figuring stuff out, I'm glad we don't have the round robins because it makes it a lot harder to
it does.
Things. Yeah. So anyway, after that, the Nationals beat the Celtics 2-0 in the Eastern Division Finals, and then the NBA Finals they lost. They took the Lakers to 7 games. This was the last year for the Lakers dynasty. Mike had retired, and they lost the first game of the finals to end that streak. So yeah, it was certainly a interesting run, and this is more of a technicality, of course, but still interesting that they got that far. And then eventually they exchanged games until Game 7. The Lakers won by 7 thanks to Jim Pollard scoring 21, and it was their 3rd title in a row and their 5th in the last 6 years, and they wouldn't win another one until 72. Although that's still not too far away, but
but for the Lakers, that was an eternity.
That's true,
unfortunately,
and of course they
with a lot of grief in there.
Yeah, there were a lot of grief in the 60s, absolutely. So, and the Al Servey, the coach, was known for his grinded out style, but yet the Nationals had the NBA's best pace that season. This was 1 year before the shot clock was instituted. That was instituted in the next season. So
so the NBA's best pace was still like ungodly slow by our normal standards.
Sure.
The standards of what we know today. But hey, he told him to run and gun this year. So. Yeah. All right, now we go to 1957, the Boston Celtics. They would end up winning this title this year. Another weird kind of wonky playoff thing, but they were 3-0, but we'll get to that here in a sec here. Regular season record, they're 44-28. They finished first in the NBA's Eastern Division. They had the NBA's best defensive rating, their best pace, and the best SRS. Of course, the coach was Red Auerbach, leading the team to that 44-28 record. The team had a famous trade the year prior as Auerbach had traded perennial All-Star Ed McCauley to the St. Louis Hawks along with the draft rights to Cliff Hagan in exchange for the 2nd overall pick in the draft. That pick, of course, became Bill Russell. So, key players for this Boston Celtics team, you might know some of the guys. Bill Sharman, 21.1 points per game in the regular season. Guess what he had in the playoffs? 21.1 points. So, Bill Sharman, Mr. Consistency there. Bob Cousy, 20.6 points in the regular season, 20.2 in the playoffs. So they were all about staying on brand there. Bill Russell, 14.7 points per game, 19.6 rebound per game in the regular season. It goes down a little bit in points per game, 13.9, but really raises the rebounds, 24.4 in the playoffs. And then Tommy Heinsohn, 16.2 in the regular season points per game, rather, and then 22.9 points per game in the playoffs. The playoff path for the Boston Celtics, they won the Eastern Division Finals over the Syracuse Nationals 3-0, and then won the NBA Finals 4-3 over the St. Louis Hawks. So they beat the St. Louis Hawks, they win the NBA Finals, so they beat the Hawks, the team that they made that big trade with to get Bill Russell, and finally, after so many years of heartbreak, the Celtics got their title. And, after so many years of bowing out in the playoffs, this will be the franchise's first title. And I believe they would add quite a few more in the next coming years. One or two, I think, maybe?
Yeah, a handful, Well, we'll have to
2, 3,
look it up.
2, no, 8.
Yeah, 8,
sorry.
right, 8 in a row, right. Yes.
Whoops.
Yeah. So yes, the interesting thing about that trade, of course, is that it's famously a one-sided trade, and to a certain extent it was. But the Hawks got 2 Hall of Famers back and went to 3 finals out of 4 years. So they had a pretty good trade there, even though you would obviously prefer Bill Russell, one of the among the greatest of all time. So yeah, their opponent also had a extraordinary playoff run, and oddly were a team that had not performed that well in the regular season. Were only 34-38, but they were 6-0 on their way to the playoffs. And you might be a little confused because you may recall earlier that the Celtics were 3-0. Well, the Hawks had an interesting playoff path where they they first had to win a tiebreaker against the Fort Wayne Pistons. And then they had they had to win one against the Minneapolis Lakers, and then they had to win one against the Fort Wayne Pistons, and then they played the Lakers again in the Western Division Finals, who they beat 3-0, and then they won the first game of the series against Boston. Obviously, it lost game 2 and then lost it in 7. But the team went through 3 coaches that year. Hall of Famer Red Holzman, of course, who would later go on to fame with the Celtics in the the Knicks in the 1970s. Not the Celtics. Somebody's going to get mad about that one. And Slater Martin was a player coach for a handful of games. Then Alex Hannum, later legendary coach, who was 33 at the time and played on the team, went 15-16 down the stretch. The Hawks did have a great talent. They had Bob Pettit, one of the greats of that era, one of the greats of all time. Ed McCauley, as was mentioned, Slater Martin, who had played for the Lakers and who was a really good defensive point guard against Bob Cousy, and Cliff Hagan, who during the regular season didn't do much. He was a rookie, but then exploded for 17 points per game and 11.2 rebounds per game in the playoffs, and then would be really one of the Hawks key players for a long time. And it was weird how they got there, but they definitely made the most of it once they got there. Game 7 in that series was pretty much one of the great. If we actually had footage of it, would be one of the great NBA games of all time. It was a Game 7 that went to overtime, and finally Bill Russell and Tom Heinsohn as rookies led the Celtics to their first championship.
It's just one more interesting fact about this year. So the Hawks, of course, they go 34 and 38. And you say, oh, geez, that was terrible. How'd they still make the playoffs? Well, the whole league was really oddly mediocre this year. You had the Boston Celtics, who were 44-28, as mentioned above. So they were good. You had the Syracuse Nationals in the East. They're 38-34, but otherwise, really nobody else was all that good. You had the Philadelphia Warriors are 37-35. The New York Knicks missed the playoffs in the East at 36-36. That would be good enough for first in the Western Division. So, very interesting there. The St. Louis Hawks, they're 34-38, so they're, of course, tied for first, as we mentioned. Minneapolis Lakers tied with them, 34-38. The Fort Wayne Pistons, also 34-38. And then the Rochester Royals, who are 4th place in the West, and the worst team in the league, are 31-41. So, nobody's really good, nobody's really bad. It's just kind of like a weird mishmash year where just everyone's just kind of in this big blob, except for probably for the Boston Celtics, who were, the only team that really, were any decent. I mean, any good. Every other team kind of hovered around 500.
Yeah,
so.
Other than Boston, everyone was between 38 and 31 wins, and Boston's record was only 13 games better than the worst team in the league, which is unusual. Obviously, I mean it's a significant difference, but that's not the usual difference between first and last place in the entire league. So I guess that's when you have 8 teams, that's it's the way it works sometimes.
Well, now we jump quite a few years ahead to 1982, and that is the Los Angeles Lakers. Regular season record of 57-25. This year is famous. We've had an episode about this before. head coach Paul Westhead was fired 11 games into the season in November. Magic Johnson and Coach Westhead rather. I keep saying Westfall. I don't know. I keep slandering Paul Westfall. He hasn't done anything.
It's a common mistake. So yeah,
I know. I feel bad doing that, but sorry, Paul Westfall. You're fine. Paul Westhead. They had a verbal altercation in the locker room. Johnson had offered input on the game, which resulted in Westhead twice telling him to shut up. Johnson then told reporters after this game that he would like to be traded anywhere, resulting in a barrage of media coverage. Again, we have done an episode about this as well. One of the inexplicable times in Magic Johnson's career where he wasn't the good guy for a while. A day after this event, Lakers owner Jerry Buss held a press conference at the Forum, and he announced the firing of Westhead with his replacement being Pat Riley as the, quote, offensive coach and general manager Jerry West as coach. So West then came to the podium and clarified to the media that Riley was indeed the head coach and that West himself would simply provide support on the bench, which lasted only 12 games. So way to stay on point and on brand there, Lakers. They couldn't even get it right in 2 seconds, but hey, that's all right. But it didn't matter because the team definitely rallied behind Pat Riley as the new coach. Key players for this run: Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, 29.9 points per game, 8.7 rebounds per game in the regular season, 20.4 points per game, 8.5 in the playoffs. Jamal Wilkes, 21.1 points per game in the regular season, 20 points in the playoffs. Of course, Magic Johnson, 18.6 points per game, 9.5 assists, 9.5 rebounds per game in the regular season. Those stay pretty consistent in the playoffs: 17.4 points, 9.3 assists, and 11.3 rebounds per game. Bob McAdoo is actually an interesting one here. He's a big factor in the playoffs and would really resurrect his career over the next few years with the Lakers. He averaged 16.7 points per game in the playoffs after only putting up 9.6 during the regular season. And also Norm Nixon stepped up big in the playoffs, averaging 20.4 points per game and 8.1 assists per game. As far as the playoff path, relatively easy for the Lakers here. They win semifinals over the Suns 4-0. They win the Western Conference Finals 4 over the Spurs, and then they win the NBA Finals 4-2 over the Sixers. They lost the second game, so that's what kind of broke up their undefeated streak. And of course, they would lose another game in the finals, but not bad, pretty close to the perfect, and one of the more perfect marks we'd seen in what, 40 years, because it had been since 1957, so it had been quite a while since we had seen a team even make a run like the 82 Lakers. So yeah. Pretty significant.
Yeah, and obviously the 83 Sixers would make the famous, the faux run, but they would lose in the second round, so they didn't have that streak of length, but they obviously had one of the great playoff runs of all time just in the next season, but didn't quite fit our criteria here. So I didn't want anybody to be like, oh, you guys didn't mention it, but when, because it would be an easy thing to overlook. But anyway, next, another again on this list, the Lakers are definitely a team that dominates this list. Is the 1989 Lakers, who did not win the title. This was their rematch against the Pistons, and they were in fact swept in the playoffs. But before we get there, regular season they had won their 8th consecutive division title, winning 57 games, and they were looking to become the first team since the Celtics of the 60s to win 3 straight titles. In fact, they had become the first team in about 20 years to win 2 straight titles. Their top players, of course, Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Byron Scott. Kareem, at this point, this was his last season. He had slowed down 10.1 points per game during the season, 11.1 in the playoffs. And then he had retirement tour where he had tributes in every arena to, of course, honor his career. And he actually writes about it he has a book about that last season, and also it had some early stuff in his career, which is a pretty good look at what happened there, and also talks about his you can see sort of the fraying of his relationship with Pat Riley, which kind of plays into what happened during this the end of the playoff run. But they swept the first round against Portland, the second round against Seattle, and the Western Conference Finals against Phoenix. That would be going 11-0 during that time. And they had a lot of extra time because the Pistons played the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals, and that was a tougher series for them. So they had a bunch of time. So Riley decided to have a mini training camp of sort for the team, and it was described as one of the hardest and most grueling they'd ever endured. Even considering the preseason, which they were known for some pretty hard workouts. And Byron Scott suffered a hamstring injury that would keep him out of the finals. And then in game 2, Magic Johnson would also suffer a hamstring injury that would limit him throughout the rest of the series rather. And so, yeah, without without Byron Scott or Magic out there, they really struggled to be able to do anything out there. They were swept. Kareem had one last pretty good game. I think he had 23 and 14 in Game 3 of that finals, but it was not enough. I think the Pistons were due anyway at that point, but obviously without without Magic and Byron Scott, the Lakers were not going to be able to compete in that series.
All right, and then our last team here is the 2001 Los Angeles Lakers regular season record of 56 and 26. They were going for a repeat of the NBA title after defeating the Indiana Pacers in the finals of the year prior. Some little fun facts about this team before we get into their playoff run. During the offseason, they acquire Horace Grant from the Seattle Supersonics. I don't remember the Horace Grant Seattle Supersonics run whatsoever. Did he ever even play for them? I honestly have no recollection. This is the first time
that I realized that he played for the Sonics. So
I saw that too, and I was like, really? It must have been some weird trade where he didn't play. I have no idea. Yeah. Anyway, they acquired Horace Grant from the Seattle Supersonics. Grant had won, of course, 3 championships with the Chicago Bulls in the early 90s. The team had also signed free agent Isaiah Rider, who had previously played for your Atlanta Hawks, Jason. I know you have many vivid memories of the Isaiah Rider.
Absolutely. It's a high point of all time, absolutely.
Of Hawkdom, yeah. As far as the playoff path for the Lakers, swept the NBA first round 3-0 against Portland Trailblazers. This is, of course, before the NBA would go to 7 games in the first round, so this is only 3-0 for this one. They would win the Western Conference semifinals, sweep, of course, of the Sacramento Kings, then sweep of the Western Conference Finals 4-0 over the San Antonio Spurs, and they almost could have done it. They could have done the perfect playoff run, but they lost game 1 to the Philadelphia 76ers and Allen Iverson, and this is the infamous Allen Iverson step over Tyronn Lue game. After that game, the Lakers pretty much won the rest of the series pretty easily. 9 points, 5 points, 14 points, and then in the ultimate game, the last game where they, of course, won the NBA Finals, they win by 12. So it was a pretty easy after that, but yeah, if it just hadn't been for that one game, we could have looked at them as a perfect playoff run, and they're kind of the easiest comp we have to the current Warriors, but the Warriors have already kind of blown past these guys as well. So I'd be interested to see how the rest of this year plays out, and if the Cavs are able to get one, or if the Warriors are able to do what the 2001 or one Lakers and all the teams that we mentioned above here couldn't do, and that's a perfect playoff run, which is no easy task, particularly when there's now an extra game in the first round, and there's just so many other factors that play into it. But it's pretty crazy. But yeah, this one Lakers team is about the closest we've seen in terms of a team that went 11-1 or what? Yeah, I can't do the math in my head. 11-1, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that is right. So yeah. So I dug into the Horace Grant Seattle experience.
Okay, thank you.
So our friends at NBA Trades did a post on this, which we'll include a link in the show notes for it because the Magic traded Grant to the Sonics, and it was for the rights to Corey Maggette and also Dale Ellis, who was somehow still around, Don McLean, and Billy Owens, and not the American Pie singer Don McLean, I assume, but a different Don McLean. So
we don't know that though. I don't
know that for sure, but I'm guessing that is not the one. So, and then he was traded to the Lakers. It was part of the Patrick Ewing trade, where he went to Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah. So he did play. Grant did play 1 year for the Sonics. He was the starting center. They actually did play. They actually played pretty well for a while, and then kind of fell out after they were 27-13, and then they ended up losing 24 out of 42 to, and they lost to the they lost to the Jazz in the first round, in a 5-game series. So. He struggled during that series, and then he was traded. That deal also involved Patrick Ewing and Glenn Rice. So,
wow,
yeah, that was a big trade.
Jeez, yeah. So I'm looking now, and there is actually photographic proof of Horace Grant playing on the side. Yeah. So we can confirm that. So right. First I've ever heard of it.
Yes.
The first I've ever actually noticed it. So that's
there you go.
A rare bit of Horace Grant fun facts coming at the end of this podcast. You didn't expect that.
No, I didn't expect that.
When you click on this episode title, when you download on any little podcast app, you don't think you're going to get an extensive breakdown of Horace Grant's Seattle Supersonics run, but that's what you get here.
I don't know if I would call that extensive, but it
no, it was extensive. It was extensive. So.
All right, well, thanks everyone for checking us out. You can find us at the Stepback at fansided.com. You can also subscribe, give us a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcast. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter. Just find us at Over and Back NBA. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back again soon.